exactly.
All right. Are we ready? All right.
As ready as we're going to be.
Episode 3, take 3. Joel Schumacher is dead now.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to our third episode of Tony and Mike Watch the World Burn. In this episode, we're going to be covering The Lost Boys. In addition to that, we'll also be talking about other entries into horror, or I should say, what's the most appropriate way to phrase this?
Great movies to introduce people to the horror genre with.
Fantastic. Perfect.
So, and I just want to say before we get rolling on this, we intended to do this episode before the news about Joel Schumacher passing away actually came out. We shot it once. We weren't happy with the video footage. We're actually reshooting this one again. But this particular episode was not being done because Joel Schumacher passed away. We had always planned to do this one because this is a movie that Mike and I have had a disagreement about forever. So
yes. The original intention of this was to be a love-hate movie defense, where we each pick a movie and one person bashes the hell out of it, the other person defends it to the death. And so this was my pick to defend to the death, while Tony prepares to mercilessly shred it, stab it in the heart, bury it.
Sorry, Joel.
Hope it doesn't come back. So, anyway, so The Lost Boys is a Joel Schumacher film released in 1987. It was shot in only 3 weeks. Real quick production. Pretty low budget too. 5.2 million. Just to kind of give you an idea of other horror movies released at that same time. We had the Friday 13th Part 7, The New Blood, which came out like 87, 88, and that had a budget of 3 million. And then we had Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors, had a budget of 4 million. So horror movie back in the day was some cheap stuff. I mean, by today's standards, it costs nothing to produce. And even adjusting for today's dollars, it's still only like, 10 million roughly for these movies.
Actually, that's kind of in line, because if you take a look at like A24 and their slate of horror films that they put out, they generally stay in that $5 to $10 million budget range. So to me, it just tracks as an inexpensive horror film. But by comparison, The Empire Strikes Back in 1980-81, that was a film that was done for $35 million, and that was state-of-the-art everything at that particular time. Yeah. So that is what a $250 million film would cost today for that level of special effects, that level of production value. So The Lost Boys, it doesn't get any points for being, cheap or quick, because 21 days is actually a fairly long shoot, especially for a film that doesn't require a lot of post-production work. Mm-hmm. And from a budgetary standpoint, it's right on target with a lot of films. By comparison, I want to say like The Terminator. If you were to look at films like that, they're going to be right in line budget-wise with what The Lost Boys cost. And Terminator had a lot more, post-production and prosthetics and stuff like that going on for it, or are roughly about the same, I guess. So,
and I'll agree with what you're saying. Like I said, by comparison, that you're right. $10 million was would fall in line with the budget of that day. By comparison. But having said that, I think the production value and the quality of what you get for your dollar is significantly better back then than it is now. I think you'd be hard to disagree that the effects and the stuff you got back in the 80s is better by comparison to anything on A24.
It depends on the movie. I mean, some of the A24 films are really phenomenal, really outstanding. There's a much higher they're relying on CG a lot more than they were back in the day. Back in the day, everything was done practically, especially makeup effects for creatures, anything like that at all. So, but the thing is while it's expensive to produce a monster, once you put the money out there, it's spent. Now you get to do whatever you want to do with it. Whereas with CG, every scene is a new construct, and you have to build all the elements for each and every one of those scenes. So, a lesson to be learned is practical is sometimes better, most definitely. So today, a $10 million film, all of that can actually go towards the production as opposed to going to film stock and editing and developing and all those services. So that's something you don't hear talked about a lot, is how much cheaper it is and how much of your budget you can actually spend on talent, on music, on sets, on costumes, on prosthetics and makeup, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference there. But I will say you're absolutely correct about one thing. The Lost Boys, they got a lot of bang for their buck. The production values on the film are top notch. It looks like an infinitely more expensive film than it was. It's amazingly well shot. The cinematography is beautiful throughout the entire film. So kudos to them for knowing where to put the camera and how to effectively shoot stuff. But more importantly than that, the technical limitations of what they were working with, they were very creative with some of their choices. And an example of that, whenever they show the vampires fly, it's always point of view. And if they had attempted to actually show the vampires in flight, it would have looked cheap. It would have looked cheesy. And even today, when they do a lot of flying stuff, it doesn't seem to work very well very often. And mostly I think it's a cognitive disconnect. People know human beings don't fly. So when you see it, it's always kind of but because the Lost Boys chose to do all those point of view shots, and you just see the victims as they're being swooped in on by the vampires, it's amazingly effective. It has that Jaws effect going for it, and it actually amps up the fear that those scenes are designed to create. So that really does work. Like I said, that smaller budget, the forced them to be creative with what they had to do. If they had had a larger budget, I don't know that it would have improved the film. As a matter of fact, I think it would have taken away from it. So
I absolutely agree with you. Working within the confines of their budget and all that stuff, I think definitely works in their favor, like you said, with Jaws and the whole point of view thing. The scene with Michael floating in the room where he hits the ceiling.
Yeah. Here's where I got to give kudos to Joel Schumacher. That's strictly a director's thing. When he was out and he was storyboarding how he wanted to actually construct that scene, he could have gone the obvious route on that one, and he didn't. And so, like that initial shot where it looks like he's laying in bed, that reveal that he's actually floating on the ceiling and that he can't control his powers, it's a wonderful way to develop the character, do it visually, and not waste dialogue doing it, not waste time doing it. So again, I think that smaller budget and having a director that actually knew what he was doing paid off, to the film's benefit. But that doesn't make me like it anymore. So so let's start from the beginning. Let's talk about the cast. Let's talk about the initial concept, and then let's get into it.
Okay, so we'll hit the cast here. We got Jason Patric as Michael, who's the older brother. Corey Haim as Sam, as the younger brother. Diane Wiest as Lucy, who is the mother. Bernard Hughes as Grandpa. Kiefer Sutherland as David, the leader of the Lost Boys. Jamie Gertz as Star, who is the hottie of the film. Brooke McCarter as Paul, one of the Lost Boys. Another Lost Boy is Billy Wirth, who plays Dwayne. And then Alex Winter as Marco, who you know as...
Bill Theodore. No, wait, it's Bill S. Preston.
Preston Esquire. Then we have Chance Michael Corbett as Laddie, who is a Lost Boy that didn't need to be there. I don't know why he's there. Yeah. So for guys, if you haven't seen the movie, he's the young Lost Boy. He's like, I guess he's supposed to be like 9, 10 years old or something like that.
I don't think he's that old. He looks 7 or 8 to me.
Yeah, and he has maybe a line of dialogue. Like I think he says "star." I think that's it.
He has 2 lines of dialogue, I think. So, he's a completely useless, wasted character, and he doesn't add anything to the film because they don't actually explain who he is or what he is or whatever. Um, so anyway,
Yeah.
when the
So
film was originally, I was going to say we
no,
covered the cast.
we're not quite there yet. We got to finish up the cast.
Oh,
So
okay,
we
got it.
have Corey Feldman as Edgar Frog.
Mr. I'm only ever going to appear in this film, and that's it. So.
Right. Jameson Newlander as Alan Frog. And then Edward Herman as Max. And that's our cast.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you need a cab forward design on your Dodge Intrepid? So, oh, well, he also played the father on the Gilmore Girls. He went on to do that. He was a character actor. He's been in so many movies, but he's always played the same guy. And I guess that was kind of a bit of stunt casting. They were trying to cast him against type, but he's always like the responsible father who is like understanding, and you come to him with your problems about how the man at the bike store touched you, like on different strokes.
Yeah. Well, I would say just about at least half the cast is stunt cast. Jamie Gertz definitely stunt casted. She's in multiple movies prior to that. She was in Crossroads. She was in. Did you say St. Elmo's? Was she in St. Elmo's Fire?
She was not in St. Elmo's Fire. She was in
Less Than Zero.
Hang on a sec. Oh, damn it. What was the name of it? It had Robert Downey Jr. and James Spader, and it was all about drug addiction and by a bunch of really. Yes, Less Than Zero. Thank you. Yeah. Let's do that one again. So Jamie Gertz, the hottie of the film, who you think is stunt casted.
I totally think is stunt casted. Absolutely.
So I think that she was just a hot property at that particular point because she had just done Less Than Zero, and she was really well received in that film. And so I think they got the one that best fit the role, that probably had space in her filming schedule. And I'm not slighting Jamie Gertz, because I actually think she's a fairly solid actress. She's not great at line delivery, but she's really great at she's great at being expressive.
She falls into the pretty but can't act category.
I think she can act. I don't, like I said, it's not her dialogue. It's not her line delivery. That's not where she stands out.
Not her line delivery.
Jamie Gertz stands out in acting with her face and acting with her eyes. Because that whole first scene where Michael sees her for the first time at the concert on the beach is wonderfully acted, and she goes through a gamut of emotions. She has the come hither look. She has the notice me but don't notice me. She has that, she runs off and she's trying to act like the cool teenager who's obviously into this guy but not, trying to come off as desperate or weird. And then you get through all that, and then you have that scene where, like, he asks her to go on a ride on his motorcycle, and David is like, get on the bike, star, and she's got this like tortured look of, but I really want to go with Michael, but I have to do what David says. And she does all that with her eyes, and that's a lot harder to do with no dialogue. I'm defending this. So.
You're defending Jamie Gertz. You're doing a good job, but we will agree to disagree on her acting ability, especially the line delivery. Like, hi, what's your name? Star.
Well, the next line of dialogue is, oh, you're one too. And she's like, what do you mean? And he's like, I was this close to being named Moonbeam, so.
Well, again, Jason Patrick carries that for them, so lucky for her. Actually, also lucky for her, Jason Patrick's how she even got that role to begin with, because they worked together on Solar Babies, and Jason Patrick recommended Jamie Gertz for this film to Joel Schumacher.
I just want you to know that we will never be watching Solar Babies, ever.
Again? Oh.
Talk about shows that shit the bed.
We already did that episode.
I know, but just it's a nice callback. So
it is. It sure is. All right, we'll just kind of gloss over the super gloss over the plot. Basically, the story is this: you got Sam, Michael, and their mother moved to Santa Carla from Phoenix to live with their grandpa because Sam and Michael's parents, they got divorced.
Yeah.
So while they're there, Michael falls in love with Star. Unfortunately for Michael, Star is involved with the local vampire motorcycle gang.
He doesn't. Hey, look, they could have been a ska band. I'm just saying.
But anyway, so Michael tries to pursue Star. David, is like, this kid's got some heart. We'll, initiate him into the group, and he becomes well, they try to get him to become a lost boy, but once he finds out that he's a vampire and then he has to kill people, he's like, oh no, I can't kill people. Fuck all that.
Yeah. Living forever and staying young and healthy. Oh yeah, that sounds great, but kill people. Oh. That's just too far for Michael because
Right.
he's good-hearted. He's good-natured. So.
And plus, he had the benefit of of being with the Star, for eternity, which isn't a bad deal.
Wait, I'm just gonna say this. Michael made the right choice to not become immortal because you show me the most attractive woman on the planet, and I will find you a man that is tired of putting up with her shit. That's all I got to say about that one. It's not always a happy ending, kids. So
Michael Fox, gets initiated to the group. He's half vampire. What else is going on? Sam meets the Frog Brothers, who run the local comic shop and are wannabe vampire slayers. And so Michael needs the help of Sam and the Frog Brothers to help defeat David and the forces of evil, battling truth, justice, and the American way.
That's I think I find that to be the most offensive part of this movie is that they keep wanting to reference Superman and they just don't get it. So I gotta throw that out there right now. And Sam's knowledge of Superman is really cursory, and I've never been to a comic book store where you had issues that were in the 80s alongside issues that were in the 280s. That doesn't happen ever. So the new stuff is on the rack, the old stuff is in the boxes, it's bagged, it's boarded. So whoever set up that comic book shop, they should have done a little bit more research. It's a fail. It's a complete fail. And the Frog Brothers are the reason why your comic book shop sucks. So.
I was about to say, maybe it's because the Frog Brothers are not only inept vampire hunters, but also comic book store keepers.
The funny thing is in like 2 or 3 shots, apparently the Frog Brothers' parents are like passed out in the background, and they look like they're just like completely high, and because they're both they're not just like falling asleep, they're like smiling. So I think they're supposed to be completely blotto on the good Santa Carla weed that Grandpa grows in the kitchen window. I don't know.
They could be customers of Grandpa's. It is established he's growing weed out in the back.
It absolutely is. Yeah. And here's the movie was originally conceived as a children's film. And that's why it was called The Lost Boys, and that's why there's such blatant references to Peter Pan all over this thing. And the original 2 screenwriters, this is the only thing that they ever wrote, but they envisioned this as a rated G children's film.
Easy to think.
So that being said, that kind of explains the Frog Brothers name, number one. Number two, it also explains the references to the Lost Boys. And the title of the film, because these are a bunch of kids that are never supposed to grow up. But you take all that into account, and then you take the fact that they took this idea, they went for a rated R film. They gave it to a screenwriter who has done a bunch of very big movies, and he's probably the guy that came up with the creative elements that were in there. But it almost feels like the remnants from the core idea, the original idea, are what really screwed this movie up. It's like they didn't want to let that go because they had paid for that actual script, when really it should have ended up on the cutting room floor for a lot of it. So this is not a movie that just has a bad ending. This is not a movie with a problematic scene that kind of like screws up the continuity of it. The problems with this movie are throughout. They are peppered through it. And so every time the film starts building momentum, Every time that it starts to feel like it's going somewhere, that you're focusing on characters, it comes to a screeching halt, and the screeching halt in every instance is Sam and the Frog Brothers. And I know that this movie is billed as a horror comedy, but maybe they should have actually tried to make it funny if that was the case. It all feels very tacked on or plugged in. It feels like, oh, well, we got to do a comedy beat here. And they all fail horribly. So, from the very beginning, when they first arrive at Grandpa's house, you have that whole bit with Sam trying to find a TV. Nothing funny about it. The big punchline to that is, well, you don't need a TV if you got the TV guide.
Yeah.
As talk about something that's dated, there's a joke that most people aren't even going to get. Is TV Guide even a thing anymore? Do they publish it?
I don't know if it is anymore or not. We'd have to look that one up. I have no clue.
So, but more importantly than that, it's like 1987, and I want to say Sam's line is something like, what that means? No TV, no MTV. And I'm thinking, really? That's it? I mean,
well,
you're out in the middle of nowhere. Cable wasn't out in the middle of nowhere anyway. Good luck to you on that one.
Well, here's the other thing too. For people who are fairly young, MTV used to play nothing but videos 24/7. They stopped doing that like 20-something years ago. So I don't know why they're still called MTV. That one remains a mystery. But this also kind of goes back to what point I will give later, that this movie was definitely built for that current MTV generation. But keep going with your.
Oh, sure, but no, I mean, like first off, Corey Haim in this movie. I'm not saying he's a bad actor. I'm saying he's bad in this role. So let's and I'm not a Corey Haim fan or a Corey Feldman fan or a fan of the two Coreys. I can't stand either of them. I've never seen either of them like do anything that really made me go, oh wow, I was wrong about them. Quite the contrary. But every scene, like you start off and you have the whole bit with the TV guide and TV, MTV, and then you have they go to the boardwalk and Sam walks into the comic book store and they meets the Frog Brothers for the first time. Every line of dialogue in that scene, everything about that scene is annoying to know. And I am someone who has frequented comic books my entire life. I have always had a local comic book store, and I have always gone and I hang out and talk with the guys there. That is not the kind of conversation that you have in a comic book store.
Well, here's the thing in general. No matter what it is you're watching, what they're presenting in film. Chances are, whatever it is you're watching, whatever information they're giving you about that subject is nowhere close to being correct, no matter what film you're watching. Unless it's a fucking documentary, let's face it, whatever information you're getting about that film, even biographical films, like Queen Bohemian Rhapsody, that whole last segment didn't happen like that. Freddie Mercury did not meet that or introduce his guy to parents. He didn't come out as having AIDS then. All that shit happened later. So I won't take anything that's presented as factual information or whatever with a grain of salt. No. I expect the Lost Boys to give me an accurate depiction of a comic book store.
No, but here's the thing. Here's kind of the point that I want to get back to, is that feels like it was a contrived solution, because the whole point of Sam goes into the comic book store, he just happens into it. That's fine. Great. No problem there. I've done that. But then he goes in and the Frog Brothers have that brief conversation with him about the issues of Superman. And so they realize that he's a real serious comic book nerd, and he brags like, oh, I've got, Batman number 14. And he's like, oh, that's a serious book. And he's like, yeah, there's only so many of them in the world. Sure, whatever, great, I'll give you. But that all feels like dialogue from a kid's movie, and it feels like that was left over from the original version of the script, because it most definitely explains the Frog Brothers, but it's also like that vehicle for Sam to be told about the vampires and, here, take this comic book. Oh, I don't like horror comic books. That whole exchange there. It's just, it makes sense in the context of a kid's film, but in a rated R film, about vampires. I'm not saying like they needed to go and do in-depth research on comic book stores and the personalities that you get in there. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that from a character standpoint, I don't buy any of it. None of it's convincing. And there are plenty of movies about stylized comic book stores that are obviously written by people that have never stepped in a comic book store. So I understand that, that, but it's so hammy and so dumb and almost insulting to a point of like,
You're taking this all way too personally
I'm not
over a
taking it
brief scene over a fucking comic book store that really, in the end of the day, don't mean fucking shit.
that's where you're
No,
wrong.
it's just no. That's where you're wrong. It's like it. You should be that offended by this. It's just a movie.
Well, okay, but
it's just a movie. It's a summer vehicle for popcorn entertainment, and I get it. It's not accurate, but what the fuck do you want? It's just a movie.
All I'm saying is really at the end of the day, Sam doesn't come off as a believable teenager.
Okay.
And the Frog Brothers never come off as believable characters. And I'm trying to, like, just within the movie's own reality, why would I believe anything that those two retards in that comic book store have to say about anything? That's the question. Because you know what? You have Michael, who is the outsider, and he falls for Star, and that all tracks. That's all very believable. And Star obviously is kind of into Michael, and then you have that dynamic of, well, Star kind of belongs to David. He's got this power over her, and they don't really explain it, but they don't have to. David's a vampire. It's part of the mythos. You get that. There's a shorthand there, and I understand all that. And then you have this really great relationship between David and Michael. David is trying to seduce Michael to become a vampire. And I buy everything about that relationship. I buy the dynamic. I buy that David's obviously the leader of the group, and Michael wants to be a part of the group, but he's only willing to go so far because David wants to be his own guy. And so it all culminates in, you have the big race on the beach where they're trying to, out testosterone each other while, being edited to sail on through the night, which is, it's a beautifully done scene. It's beautifully rendered. Again, it's visual storytelling. It's showing like, Michael really just wants to feel included in this new place. I buy everything about that relationship. And then they go to the hangout where the Lost Boys, go, and they do the whole bit with the Chinese food. And, hey, Michael, you enjoying those maggots? What? And he sees
maggots.
the maggots.
Michael, you're eating maggots.
It is this perfectly thought out scene about how they subtly show David has this ability to warp people's perceptions and change how they see things and how they interact with things. And it's also really cleverly done that this is the way that he gets Michael to actually drink the vampire blood, for the first time. So
yeah, because like trick me once with the maggots. Oh, trick me again with the worms. You're gonna trick me a third time saying this is blood. This ain't blood.
Exactly. So you have this amazingly well rendered, well thought out, completely believable relationship between Michael and David and Star and all the other Lost Boys. Why am I not allowed to expect the same kind of believability from Sam and the Frog Brothers?
Okay. Can I retort?
Do what? Oh,
Can
sure.
I retort? Okay. All right. So I agree with you in that this is totally those characters are remnants of the original idea of Peter Pan and that. I don't have a problem with it, and here's why. I totally buy into the relationship of Sam and Michael. They work very well as brothers. Their chemistry is there. I totally believe that they're brothers, hands down. And I don't think you can disagree with that. I think the chemistry is there.
It has moments.
Okay, fair enough. And the other thing, the other remnant is I don't believe the Frog Brothers and Sam were supposed to be cast at the age that they were cast, which also goes back to the stunt casting too, because Corey Feldman was in The Goonies.
Yeah.
So he was already known there, and then he was also in another horror movie. He was in Friday 13th Part 4. So
Yeah,
he's done
that's right.
horror.
Yeah.
Then you have Corey Haim, who did Lucas,
Yeah.
who acts very well in that movie. Even you can't say otherwise.
I'm not
Um,
disagreeing.
and then he also did another horror movie, Silver Bullet. So they both have credentials as decent actors, and then also had credentials in horror. So again, that goes back to that stunt casting. I agree with you in the sense that the dialogue doesn't quite fit for them. I think if they were cast younger, maybe it would work better. I don't know, but it's kind of what we got. And it's for me, it's serviceable enough.
See, that's
Because here's the thing: if you took those guys out, then you're really all you have left is just Michael, David, and Star, which they didn't have enough material to do to pad that out for
wait,
another
stop
45
right
minutes.
there.
Because
There are
let me finish. Let me
okay.
retort. So in that regard, they would have to rewrite the whole thing from scratch. And I know that's what you're going for. You think it should be rewritten again, and all those younger elements should be taken out. But for what they had, I think it works, and I think it also helps at that time get a younger demographic that you probably wouldn't have got if it was just about the older teenagers and things like that. Because then you're getting in that 16 Candles and that more
John Hughes,
yeah
The
yeah
Breakfast Club, 16
that
Candles, Weird
demographic
Science.
of teens where if you got Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, you can kind of get a little bit younger group. I know you're going to say, well, this is a rated R film, and that's true, but back in the 80s, adults were more lax with stuff like that.
Well,
I've seen rated R movies with my parents, and I'm sure you've probably seen rated R movies with your parents, or you have snuck in to see rated R
oh,
movies.
sure. No, and I don't disagree with you, but see, here's the thing, and I guess here's what's kind of changed culturally, is that rated R means, rated R is restricted, no one under 17 admitted without parents.
And that's what it's
That's
always been.
literally what the warning says. And once upon a time, the family got up on Friday nights or Saturday nights, and everybody went to the movie, and y'all got to sit around and have that, like, oh, well, what are we going to go see? So, yeah, I do agree with you. Rated R now is very different than rated R then. And rated R back then meant your mom and dad had to come with you. They weren't going to let some 13 or 14-year-old to just come and sit in the theater.
Yeah.
So, I get that.
That's what it still means. It's just the culture has changed where now parents won't let a kid watch a rated R movie because because you'd be 17, you're not 18, you can't watch this. That's
Well,
how they take it now instead of like what you're saying. Whereas as long as you're accompanied by an adult, it's okay for you to watch this.
I mean, actually, the
The
point I
culture
was trying to
change,
get at.
not a rating change.
No, well, the point that I was trying to get at is I think that mall culture and teen culture in general kind of changed things because what I
Dramatically.
mean
Yeah.
by mall culture was, back in the late 80s, early 90s, mom and dad would take, Johnny and Timmy up to the mall and drop them off at 7 o'clock on a Friday night and tell them, I'll meet you out here at 10. And they would go to the food court, they would go to the movies, and they would go, mess around in the mall.
And that
Those
also
days are
falls in line
gone.
with the boardwalk culture. It's the exact same thing. It's just an outdoor mall with some
Yeah,
rides and some
yeah.
other shit.
But
Yeah.
I think what really has changed as far as movie going demographics go, it used to be a family outing. It used to be like in the mid 80s, early 80s, everybody would go and everybody would like pick their movie, hey, let's go see this. And the whole family would go see the movie together. So if you were 14, you were going to see this movie, even though it was rated R, but you were with your parents when you saw it. Whereas now, the people that go to movies most often are 16, 17, 18, 19. So the crowd has skewed younger because as an adult, I don't go to the theater unless it's something I really want to see right away.
Yeah.
And that I'm sure that's true for a lot of people our age, is that we don't go to the movies anywhere near as often as the teenage crowd does. And the
And
teenage
that's
crowd
why
does it to get out of the
horror
house.
movies now get that PG-13 push,
Well,
just
there
for
was
that reason, like you were saying.
there's the PG-13 push, and so you see like a lot of every horror movie that came out in the 80s, almost all of them were rated R, period. Now they film a rated R film and then they cut it back to where they
Down to
just slide
13.
it under the line to where it's PG-13.
Yep.
Back then they just, if you want to come see it, tell your mom you want to come see it and bring her with you. We'll sell 2 tickets. So I think that's part of the culture that changed. So I will give you that. Yeah, they were probably trying to when they cast Sam and the Frog Brothers, they were trying to skew a bit for a younger audience. They were really trying to make something that was entertaining for adults and entertaining for kids. But they did it in the worst way possible. I mean, really. And you are saying that, well, it's the dialogue. And I'm thinking, you know what? No, it wasn't the dialogue. It was the delivery. It was the actors and possibly the director. I don't know who decided that Sam should talk like that or
Right.
that the Frog Brothers needed to sound like pretentious douchebags for every line of dialogue that they said. But that is exactly how those performances are delivered.
Yeah.
And that's what I can't stand about this movie, because let me just change one thing. Let's leave all the elements exactly as they are, and let's change it to where, rather than the Frog Brothers, oh yeah, you got to stake them, you got to get those bloodsuckers, and every line of dialogue, instead of that crap delivery, have it whispered. You know what? I read this, and you have to stake them. It comes off more believable, because I realize that the Frog Brothers are trying to come off like they've done this before, like this is their bread and butter.
Yeah.
But at the same time, here's Sam, and here's Sam, and he's new to this town, and he's walked into this comic book store completely on accident. And these, oh, you got to watch out for these stupid bloodsuckers. Read this horror comic book. How do we know that anything in that? How do we know that the Frog Brothers aren't just completely delusional? How do we know, like, when the comic book store is shot, they're not torturing animals and they're future serial killers? That's every bit just as likely. So why should Sam take anything they say at face value? But he does.
He doesn't take it seriously until he gets attacked by, almost attacked by his brother, and his brother's falling out the fucking window. So I'm sorry, but that's a big fucking clue that, hey, maybe there's fucking vampires in Santa Carla. Okay, I can see my hand behind my fucking brother.
The Frog Brothers are pushing this before any of that happens.
Yes, he is. Yes, they are. But Sam is like, no, I don't believe that shit. It's not until after the fact that he believes it and goes to them for help.
And, even if they had cast it with younger kids, different actors may very well have saved those particular scenes. But in this instance, it didn't. So after the first comic book.
So let me just go back to this. And so I agree with a lot of your points, but for kind of different reasons at the same time. If they were recast younger, I think the intended deliveries as they were directed would have went across better, because like you said, they do come across like very snotty, bratty, and just overall douchey lines. So when it comes out from people of that age, it's like, yeah, it doesn't quite work. And if they're younger, I could make it more believable, especially if Sam's character was a little bit younger, then you could see him, maybe kind of looking up to the Frog Brothers, because maybe they're older and stuff like that, and they're in the same things that he's into, so he can kind of relate more to those characters. I think that would have helped it, and I agree with you too. The delivery, if they would have dialed back Corey Feldman's gruff voice and all that shit, I agree with you. That doesn't work either. Yeah. So yeah. But for me, that doesn't break the movie. And like I said, without a hardcore rewrite, if you don't have those 3 characters in there, wow, you really got to pad it out to make this movie work.
I disagree. And here's the thing: if they had just explained Laddie, and I'm sure that stuff was in the script, and I'm sure that it was
Edit
probably
on the
shot,
floor.
and it probably wound up on the editing room floor. But if they had explained Laddie's character, or even Star's background, like, you know, she was a girl that was babysitting this kid, or that kid's her younger brother, anything like that at all, they don't have to do a major rewrite. They could literally have just explained that, because who would turn a child that young into a vampire? How did that happen?
Unless it's to lure somebody else into it, as leverage.
Well,
Which what they do at the end anyway with Lucy and Max. They use Lucy as well. They use the kids as leverage against Lucy to get Lucy to turn.
And again, if they had shown that David was pulling the same trick on Star, and they had actually devoted some screen time to it, I will take a scene like that, even if it's poorly done, even if the kid can't deliver a line to save his life, even if everything, hey, want a drink? Even if Kiefer Sutherland owns that camera in every scene that he is in. He is absolutely stunning. So I want you to imagine a scene where Kiefer Sutherland as David is at a park or on the boardwalk, and he sees a little kid, he sees Star, and then like the little kid comes over, and David has a flask with some of his blood in it, you know, a overly ornamental glass jeweled thing, and he's like, hey, you want a drink?
Sun? It's the '80s, dude. So it was totally a Capri Sun. He had the pouch. He put that bitch in there, or a juice box.
Like one scene where we're introduced to David he got Laddie to take a drink of his blood to lure Star in. That, okay, first off, we get to get rid of one of the Frog Brothers scenes in its entirety because we've already added to the runtime. But two, it actually shows that David learned this trick from his dad.
Yeah.
And that actually,
I like that. I like that. I think
actually would have been a better solution than anything with the Frog Brothers in it. And, you know, here's the other thing, too. Let's just say, that, you know, again, not having a major rewrite. Just Sam goes into the comic book shop, and rather than, oh, I don't like horror comics, he goes straight to the horror comic book thing, and he starts like grabbing, oh, these back issues, this is from a guy that actually lived here in Santa Carla. I've always wanted to read these. And he starts reading it, and then he realizes that the shit that's printed in the comic books is actually based on vampires that are in Santa Carla. Again, infinitely more interesting than what we got.
That would have been good.
And then you have he goes back to the comic book shop, and he's trying to convince the kids that work there that, hey, this is for real. We should do something about this. You don't have to change anything else about it. You can keep even the pacing. You can keep the same order of the scenes. Just change those dynamics, and you've already made an infinitely better film that's still every bit as relatable and has every element that's already there. And all I have done is just change Sam's character this much.
Mm-hmm.
So
not even his character, just situation.
Mm-hmm.
Really, because you didn't change his character at all. You just changed the fact that he's pursuing something, looking for something, as opposed to being offered something.
Exactly. So.
Yeah. But, that's an interesting take, and I think you're right in that context. That would work very well.
And
shit aside, let's talk about all the good stuff that's in this movie. Because like you said, there is a ton of good stuff in this fucking movie. Ton of it.
Wait, real quick. Finance us, sponsor this, and I'll turn the cup around. So just throwing that.
So the good stuff, and there is a ton of good stuff.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
It's shot. It is very well directed, short of the everything you have mentioned previously.
There's still more. There's lots more to talk about, but yeah, we good in this film.
We bury those fucking 3 bodies, all right? Leave them buried. So it's shot well. The editing is really great. Like all that chasing on the beach, on the motorcycles, all that stuff is expertly done.
Absolutely.
and the atmosphere. I think they capture the atmosphere of that film very well too. It's 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 slightly foreboding, but just slightly. You know, it's not very heavy. You know, it's
Yeah,
not it's like
it's
watching Halloween with
vampires.
like heavy amounts of dread. There's just enough dread lurking around in every scene, you know, to let you know that it's not just, you know, light fare, super light
Yeah,
fare.
no, you're dead on the money. You're absolutely correct. That all the vampire stuff, all the vampire lore, all the scenes with David and Michael, and even the scenes with Lucy and Max, all of those are wonderfully done. They're absolutely as good as they possibly could have hoped for this particular movie. It's all the vampire mythos, the vampire lore, and there's some
The way
stumbling
they
blocks.
look, their interpretation of the vampire is great too. Because when you look
Yes,
at these guys, they stand out in the crowd big time.
yes.
You know, when they're out there, all eyes are on them, and you see that right away. The very first scene, we're on the merry-go-round where the punk girlfriend, she can't help but the I fuck David. You know, it's super fucking obvious.
Yeah,
And then also too, you know, they got their motorcycles and all that stuff. So like super hip vampires. I mean, other than like let's see, like Interview with the Vampire, I can't think of like a better representation of vampires in the movie.
I can think of a few, but we'll get to that later. But yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
from a conceptual standpoint, the film carries that really, really well. They handle that subject matter well. I mean, it was the first movie that made being a vampire seem cool. That's
yeah,
really what it boils down to. It really was. That was the selling point of this movie. Was, you know what, they're not this because prior to this you had, you know, the original Dracula with Bela Lugosi, and you had Salem's Lot and Nosferatu, and being a vampire was, you know, kind of creepy and gross, and all of a sudden here's this movie that comes along and it made being a vampire cool.
mm-hmm.
And they really geared that towards the MTV crowd. They all look like rock gods, and you know, that
Totally.
whole thing. So yeah, conceptually that was brilliant. That was perfectly handled. But you brought up Interview with the Vampire, and I'm just gonna say, take a good hard watch on Interview with the Vampire again, and you watch what 9-year-old Kirsten Dunst, and every scene she is in, she captivates.
Mm-hmm.
That is how you do a child on film. And not every line of dialogue that she has is a great line of dialogue, but I believe every word that comes out of her mouth. At no point am I so put off by how she's saying it or what she's saying that I'm thinking this is just dumb.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest flaw. Again, that's the flaw with this film, and that's why I can't and won't recommend this movie to people, is that I can't stand any of the supposed heroes.
Back to the good points of this fucking film. We have cool vampires that pulled right out of fucking MTV
Absolutely.
video. The production's great. I mean, I know, like, you know, you're saying that budget wise this is par for the course, but the way this looks a lot more money than any of its contemporaries of
Oh,
its time.
I don't know.
It's much more fucking slick. This looks like a movie that costs twice as much as what it really costs.
I'm going to
Yeah,
disagree with you. I'm going to disagree with you there.
you go back and you watch Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. You watch Jason Part 7 and any of those other horror films that came on that same era. This has got it's got an extra little bit of sheen on top of it that makes it look, again, the whole MTV thing. It has a spit polish of a well produced music video without
Absolutely,
actually being a
yes.
music
And
video.
see, that's the thing. That is one of the areas where this film is very influential. In the 80s, this is how you shot a horror film. You know, and it hadn't really changed all that much from the slashers of the late
Mhm.
70s. And so, yeah, you're right. All the Friday the 13th films look like Friday the 13th films. All of the Halloween films all look like Halloween films. This is the first, you know, horror film that really did get shot using the same kind of production methods as a music video. And that's where Joel Schumacher, as a director, I got to give him kudos. He understood that the visual language was important. And he also understood that the younger kids that have been watching MTV for 4 years now or 5 years now, whatever it is, that they got this language. So it was tailor-made for that crowd. You're absolutely correct in everything that you're saying there. I agree with you 100%. The one thing that he didn't get, though, was this is not how teenagers talk. This is not how teenagers act. This is not how teenagers dress. And this is not, that's what he got wrong with Sam and the Frog Brothers. And that's, again, that's what I think the flaw of this movie is. Wait, just real quick, I just want to talk about the fact that the one of the other things about the movie, and it snaps me out of the movie a couple of times, is they don't pay attention to their own lore. They play fast and loose with those rules. And it's just it's small things, it's subtle things. And I know that I'm being nitpicky about it, but it's just one of those, if you're going to have a mythic creature and you're going to base your movie around that mythic creature and you're going to have rules concerning that mythic creature, don't violate your own rules. You know, if Michael Myers is a mute that breaks out of an insane asylum, don't let him speak, ever. Mm-hmm. Same is true with the Lost Boys. If you have vampires and they can't come into a house unless they're invited in, at least give me the scene where they invited David in, or where Star invited them in, or where one of the Frog Brothers says, you know, David's outside the window taunting them, and one of the Frog Brothers goes, well, why don't you come in here and say that? Give me something that at least makes that make sense, because it is very well established that Max can't come into the house, or they're rendered powerless if Max is invited into the house. Well, you know, you establish that in your lore, continue through it.
So
it makes the movie better.
It was never established that you could not come into the house. It was just established that if you're invited in the house, then there's nothing you can really do to harm them. You're screwed. Now, if you come into the house uninvited, obviously you can be harmed. That's something that was established. The only thing that wasn't really set up, though, that didn't pay off very well, was more of the Christian elements of it, or the holy elements of it. They're affected by holy water, but there's no cross thing or nothing like that. Nobody ever pulls out a cross.
Yeah. If holy water works, why don't crosses?
Yeah. Well, they never bothered to pull one out, and I don't know why.
Well, you do see several scenes where Sam does this with his fingers.
Right, that's not cross.
While he's backing away from David or Michael or whoever. So
it's Michael, and again, that's more of a joke and a throwaway thing than, you know, an actual attempt to keep a vampire at bay.
Sure. But, you know, I mean, like, Blade handled that really well, I think, in that, you know what, crosses in holy water don't do dick. You use a stake or silver. They explained their mythology and they stuck to it. Yeah. And I wish that the Lost Boys had done that. And if they, you know, again, if a cross doesn't do anything, then why does holy water? So it's just, like I said, it's just one of those areas where a little bit more consistency would have made the film better. Not worse.
Again, a real cross never came into play. This is not a real cross. This is you making a sign of a cross. This is not a real cross.
I understand, but how hard is it to come by 2 boards and some hot glue? So
I don't know. So it's not the fact that like it's useless. They just never employed it. So you could get that argument. Why didn't they employ a cross? I don't know.
I was gonna say. I mean,
I think having that comic, like if they would have gave the comic, then they could explain the rules to the comic.
Exactly. That's kind of something that I was trying to get at earlier when we were discussing, like, you know, how do you, you know, have these same plot points. You could have had all that. You could have literally done a montage of them going through the comics and showing individual comic panels where it's like literally explaining it.
Yeah.
And it would have sufficed. And even more importantly, it would have been even more MTV-esque. As weird as that sounds, it would have fit.
You could have placed that to some music, some cool music, and yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So, you know, you got all that going on. And like I said, to me, this movie is ripe for a remake. Granted, it's all dependent on your cast. It's all dependent on your director and what parts of the original that he likes. But if A24 is out there, me and Mike, $10 million, we have experience making films. We can knock this shit out of the park. Email us.
Okay, so obviously you won't recommend this film for the reasons you stated.
No.
I recommend this film. I like this as a entry to horror. Um, for several reasons. It's fairly light fare for the most part, but there's still plenty of grit in there. The parts that need to be scary are scary and graphic. But then if you have like a younger audience, or if you're don't like language and stuff or nudity, there's maybe a couple of shits in the movie. I don't think there's even a fuck in the movie. Is there a fuck in the movie?
He's referred to as a shit-sucking vampire at one point by Sam. Other
But
than
beyond
that, I can't think of a whole lot of swearing. But I mean, really, honestly, if you're gonna go see a rated R movie and the swear words are the turnoff, that's with you. That's not with the film.
And that's the other thing too. If you rated this film today, I think it would definitely be a PG-13 film.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those movies that just barely crossed the line into our territory. And I think the scenes that actually did it was when the vampires go to the beach and they attack the surf Nazis.
Yeah.
If that had been left out, you would have lost the sense of who the vampires are and how brutal being a vampire actually is when they feed. So I get why it's in there, but I think you're right. I think they were shooting for probably a PG-13, and I think they just narrowly missed it. And it was argued, hey, we can't take this out. And they're like, well, just take the R. My final thoughts on The Lost Boys is it's not a complete failure. It succeeds in certain areas. It has some interesting stuff. And as an artifact of the 80s, it's definitely, watch it one time. You'll get a real vibe for the music. You'll get a real vibe for the clothes, the hair. You'll definitely get what something geared towards the MTV generation is really all about, because that's most definitely what this movie is.
Great 80s snapshot for sure.
It is a wonderfully shot film, and there's, from a film student perspective, there's some interesting stuff here. But from a narrative perspective and from a how to tell a compelling horror film, a horror comedy, it fails for me. And so I'm not a fan of the film ultimately. It was one of those, I watched it twice to get ready to watch this, and watching it the first time was maddening, and watching the second time was a slog. And so this is not on my recommend list by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I wouldn't classify it as a horror comedy. I think it's just a horror that has some comedic elements in it. But anyways, so let's go on to movies that you would recommend as your intro to horror.
I have several, and I'm going to break this up a couple different ways, but I'm just going to say, if you're looking for a solid horror film that is acceptable or palatable for a younger crowd, if you're not into the blood and gore aspects of horror, but you want something that's got some tension and is kind of scary and is fun to watch Poltergeist. Watch Poltergeist 1 and 2. They're both amazing films, and they're wonderfully well shot. They are the epitome of Spielberg at the height of his craft. They're fun, they're funny, and from a family perspective, they get family dynamics correct. So those two films I think are great. Jaws is a wonderful introduction to horror films, and at no point does it ever go over the top with its blood or its gore or anything like that. Gremlins is a horror comedy. Nice. And it most definitely has all the makings of a great creature feature, but at the same time, it's charming and it's fun and it's really funny. And hey,
yeah, and that's the comedic moments that work really, really well.
And Corey Feldman is in it.
Is actually in that one too? Yes, I forgot all about that. Nice.
Yeah. So proof that he can actually act when he's got a good director and a good script to work with. From a vampire standpoint, if you're like really looking for a great 80s vampire, go watch Fright Night. A horror comedy and really amazingly well done. Go watch Near Dark. Yeah. These are infinitely better vampire films than The Lost Boys, and they still manage to get their own mythology right. They manage to be genuinely entertaining, and at no point do you feel insulted or pandered to, and you won't ever have to hear the Frog Brothers.
I will say this. I will say this. The comedic elements in Fright Night must definitely work better in that movie than Lost Boys. But again, Lost Boys really is intended to be a comedy. Uh, but Fright Night, on the other hand, is very well done in his comedic elements. Evil Ed is a fucking hysterical character. I love it when he's like, "Oh, Brewster, you're my hero." And Roddy McDowall is great in that. Chris Sarandon is an outstanding vampire. Excellent choice. No doubt about it. I don't think it's better than the Lost Boys. It's up there. It's up there. It's just it depends kind of what you're going for. It has more of the traditional vampire elements in it that I don't like, because you do see Chris Sarandon turn into a giant bat. I could do without that stuff. The effects in it aren't as good as Lost Boys. It does have the polish that Lost Boys has, in the production, but it's still an outstanding film. A lot of twists and turns in it. Roddy McDowall is great. Him as Peter Vincent, as the vampire hunter, who's not a vampire hunter, just like the brothers or wannabe vampire. People pretend to be vampire hunters when they're really not.
And that's why I picked that one and put it on my list, was because I mean, really, he is exactly what I think the Frog Brothers were intended to be.
Yeah.
They come off like they know what they're talking about, and it's very obvious that they don't. Whereas this film, exact same kind of setup, exact same kind of character, but he carries it so amazingly well, and he is genuinely, all those parts are genuinely funny. Yeah. So it's a much better film than The Lost Boys.
And then Going to Near Dark is another outstanding film that I like very much, but it is a slow burn of a movie, and it's definitely not going to appeal to everybody. It's definitely not an entry level horror movie by any stretch. I think even you can agree to that one.
I wouldn't say that it's an entry-level horror film, but I will say it is one of the best vampire films ever made, and definitely one of the real lost gems of 80s cinema. It is one of those films that I don't understand why people don't talk about it now, because when you see the bar scene in Near Dark and you see Bill Paxton's performance, you will never forget it, and you will see that has been ripped off and recycled so many times since that film. But this was the movie that did it and did it right, and it's directed by Catherine Bigelow, who gave us Point Break and The Hurt Locker, and so she's just a wonderfully accomplished director, and she did this amazing vampire film that's kind of been lost to the sands of time. And so go check that one out. It's a much more satisfying watch.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a fantastic film. It's definitely worth your time. Especially film aficionados will love it. If you're first time, no, not yet. Watch some of the other ones first. Watch Lost Boys. Watch damn it, Fright Night.
So what about your picks for intro horror films? What are your five films that you would use to introduce people to the genre?
Well, I got 4 because Lost Boys is going to be my first one, and I'm doing this by decade. These are going to be borderline. I'm really walking the line with these. So my first one is Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock. You can't go wrong with Alfred Hitchcock film number 1 because he does suspense and all that stuff. It is kind of a slow burn at the beginning. The first half hour does take a while to get through before it actually gets going. But man, once it gets going, it goes.
It's a wonderful character study of insanity, and that's it works. It even if you think, oh, I saw the scene with Janet Leigh in the shower, and that's what the film is about. Yeah. Watch the movie. It's better than that. So
my second choice is in the 70s, and it's Carrie by Brian De Palma.
Good pick. That actually almost made my list because that's one of those films that they really got being a teenager right. All the bullshit of high school and all the character dynamics and what it's like to be an outcast. I love Carrie. The only reason it didn't make my list was because I really wanted to give a little bit more of a sampling that you could watch with younger kids, but then also hit the vampire genre as well. But no, Carrie is absolutely a phenomenal flick.
And for me, this is one of those movies too where it's every bit as good as the book. The only thing that the book does different is it gives you like some articles and some police investigative stuff. So you get like some of the more periphery things that have to deal with the story that kind of add some texture to it.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, everything else that's in the book is right here, almost scene for scene, line for line, word for word. And Sissy Spacek is awesome in it. John Travolta's is one of his first films.
Yes. Yes.
William Catt from
Greatest American Hero.
Beautiful mane of blonde hair.
Nancy Allen is in that one as well.
From RoboCop.
Yes. So I've had a crush on Nancy Allen forever. I always thought that Nancy Allen was just a really incredibly good-looking woman.
She's got that slight sleazy thing going about her, if you know what I'm saying, like the kind of dangerous girl.
Yeah, she's got the sweet and innocent in front of your parents, but she's also the chick that would like get you to do shit you never thought you would do on a date.
Yes.
So yeah, no, I completely agree. Nancy, call me. So
Lost Boys is my 80s pick. For the 90s, I'm going with Scream, Wes Craven.
Okay.
It is graphic at times, but if it's like your first horror movie, this also explains all the tropes of horror movies. So you kind of get a two for one kind of thing. All the tropes in a slasher horror movie.
I was actually, you say Scream, and I was actually going to have Cabin in the Woods on my list, and I ultimately wound up eliminating it exactly for that reason, because it's all in-jokes. It's all, like, you have to be familiar with the genre to understand a lot of the humor that's in there, so I don't know that that's a really great starter flick. It's one of those, after you've seen a couple of horror films, definitely watch that one because then it's hilarious. But unless you get the joke, you have to have it explained to you. So that's why Cabin in the Woods wound up knocked off my list. So
no, I think you're right. I think that's a good point. Still a great movie and definitely worth watching.
Absolutely.
My last is a 2000s pick, Trick or Treat by Michael Dougherty. Have you seen that?
Okay. I have actually. So.
Actually, the first time I watched it was actually your place. I forgot all about that. Yeah, that's right.
So.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, it's his directorial debut, and what a debut it was. Beautiful anthology. Everything loops back together around at the end. It has great kid actors in it. Like that last scene with the girl that has autism was fucking amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, really well done. Anna Paquin's in it. There's some other people that you'll probably recognize as you're watching the movie. One of my favorites though is I think he's a teacher, but I'm not sure. But he's the dad. He's got the younger son, and this whole time he's like trying to dispose of this fat kid's body, and trying not to get caught. And you think as he's doing this, that he's trying to hide it from his son, because every time the sun comes out, he's like trying to cover the body and all this stuff. It's like, no, you go to bed. We'll carve the pumpkin later. And then when it's all said and done, they get together. The dad takes him downstairs, and you think for a second that he's gonna stab his son in the back of the head, and then you look down, and then there's somebody else's head, like a person's head, and that the dad is actually teaching the kid how to carve this human head and make it to a jack-o'-lantern. It's really good.
Nice.
Yeah. So those are my picks. Anybody else?
Wait, just one more. Just one more. I just gotta throw it here as a great introduction to horror. The original Creep Show.
Nice. Yes. Yeah.
So, I think that is a perfect starter film, and from a visual standpoint, it's an amazingly distinct film. It's beautifully shot.
Isn't that Romero that did that one?
George Romero did that one, yes.
Yeah.
And it's
Night of Living Dead. Night of Living Dead almost made my list.
So, well, I love Night of the Living Dead. I don't know that it's an intro film, though. I think that that's something that somebody's got to know that they're into the genre before they jump on board with that one. It's kind of like the Blair Witch Project. The more you know about the genre, the better that film is. The less you care about it. You know, if you're not a horror film person, you're probably not into the Blair Witch. It's a
I would not
boring
recommend the
movie
Blair
about a
Witch
bunch of
to
people
anybody.
walking in the woods with cameras. So you know, it's one of those kind of things. But no, Creepshow I think is amazingly accessible. Even if you're not a horror fan, you can throw Creepshow in and you're gonna laugh and you're gonna be entertained. And it has some genuinely like creepy moments without going overboard or being
Yeah,
extremely gross. So
yeah. I don't think you can go wrong with any movie on this list. No matter what you pick, is going to be good. And you're going to be happy you watched it. Except for
I
some,
feel confident in my picks, and I'm just gonna say you get to watch all my picks and never have to watch The Lost Boys. So.
all right. Well, I think we pretty much said everything we need to say. What are we doing
So
next, Tony?
So join us next time on Tony and Mike Watch the World Burn when we discuss the failings of Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Um, next time.
See you guys next
Peace.
time.